Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Today we're talking about trans rights, trans athletes, and anti-trans and queer legislation. This is a video I said I was going to do in August, and I have put off until now. Then people started communicating with me about Dax Shepherd's latest podcast on Armchair Expert, where he interviewed JVN, and it went a little off the rails. They were in the middle of that banter, chattiness, and the issue of whether or not the New York Times was a liberal or conservative publication came up, which led directly to trans rights. And I have all sorts of opinions and feelings on how that happened or why that happened, but I also have sort of a bias when it comes to the host of Armchair Expert, so we'll put that to the side because honestly, that was JVN's fight to fight, and they fought it well. Eloquently, I would say. I'm not sure I'm necessarily advocating for you to go listen to this podcast because I don't know how I feel about it getting more listens, and also I don't want it to be triggering. I'm briefly going to address what Dax said and put over here the timestamp you should go to if you want to skip what Dax said, just in case it is triggering. Dax brings up the fact that he does not feel that conservatives are conservative because they don't have education. He thinks that conservatives are conservative because they're asking questions that liberal people are afraid to ask. I think it's important here to draw a really clear line. Dax lives in California. JVN lives in Texas. Personally, I live in Florida. Texas and Florida, very different in how they deal with people than how California deals with people. So opinions and experiences are going to be very different between JVN and Dax, and honestly, I don't think that's really addressed. But Dax talks about the fact that a lot of people out there are upset or confused about whether or not teens should be allowed to transition. And then he says very quickly, on the other hand, if not being able to transition means that they unalive themselves, should we have let them transition in the first place? Welcome back. Okay. Which of course this sort of banter becomes serious, and then we start talking immediately about trans athletes. I'm going to break that down in a minute, but I just want to explain to you what JVN said because I think it's important to get that context from someone who is non-binary. So JVN talks about the fact that there's already inequality in sports, right? There are economic barriers to people participating in sports, whether it is in a community field, whether or not their community has a field to participate in, whether or not their parents have the money to put them in a travel club or even their community rec league in order to get the experience in sports to be able to play in middle school and high school. A lot of that depends on where you live. It depends on what your resources are. It depends on the color of your skin, and it depends on who's around you, whether or not you get those advantages in the first place. So the idea that,
we're trying to make sports fair,
is the thing that's said by a lot of people when they bring up these questions doesn't sit with me anyway, because if you cared that much, why were you not caring all these years that all of these inconsistencies and unfair practices existed for kids in the first place? Also, if all of this is really about, women and fairness to women, then why didn't you care about the pay gap between the way that men are paid and the way that women are paid until lawsuits made it so you couldn't ignore it? And even then, you were annoyed by the lawsuits because you didn't want to see those people's faces in front of you. I might have some feelings about this. So JVN then talks about, okay, let's talk about the inherent unfairness in ability anyway, because that's the argument that people have, right? You've got a trans woman who, because of when she transitioned, she retains the ability to do the sport better than cis women. There are no actual places where this bears up, but we can leave that to the side too, because why do we actually want to argue about things that are actually happening? And instead, we're afraid about things that are not happening. So let's talk about Michael Phelps, right? Amazing swimmer. He won the hearts of multiple countries. He also has extra webbing in his toes. He has double jointed ankles. His arm span is 7 feet or something. He is already genetically going to be superior in his sport to everyone else around him. But you don't prevent him from competing. And then you've got people like Caster Semenya, who in 2012 and 2016 won gold medals that were then taken from her, and she was not allowed to compete on that level anymore. She was born intersex. She didn't transition. She didn't even get to pick the gender that she was going to live as. Her doctors and her parents picked that. And she excelled in a sport and then was stripped of her ability to excel in that sport because she was born in a way that she couldn't have helped. Let's talk about Leah Thomas, because this is where so many people are pointing to and saying,
see, that's unfair.
You have a trans woman who is beating all of these cis women at this sport.
And honestly, you can really point to this case as being one of those things that started people looking and really looking in the wrong places for the answers to this, because we all now literally know that the people who were swimmers who spoke out against her were lobbied to speak out against her by people who are against trans inclusion. But okay, we'll just act like that didn't happen, right? I'm not somebody who really enjoys, let's pick this example and this example of the reasons why someone's logic is not accurate, but this is the question I get asked all of the time by people who want to challenge my stance on trans rights, which is, what do you think about trans athletes? What I think about trans athletes is there were for years actual measurements factored into the WA, factored into the NCAA that measured things like testosterone, that measured muscle mass, that measured height and weight, and made things equal the way they should have been. In 2015, there was a study by Harper, and it showed definitively in that study, when someone is born assigned male and transitions, which is, by the way, a trans woman, their muscle mass and their blood oxygen levels all really do equal out to the general range of what a cis woman would be at. And so their actual abilities or development is not even in question, according to this study in 2015. We don't talk about that study though, right? In 2021, there's a study done that shows that trans women, after a year of transitioning, after a year of hormone replacement therapy, retain slightly higher muscle mass than cis women. However, their levels of hemoglobin are comparable to cis women. What does hemoglobin do? It carries oxygen through the blood to the muscles, which is what allows your muscles to work while you are working them out, while you are doing athletic things. So just because their muscle mass is bigger doesn't mean they're actually able to use all of those muscles, because they can only use what the hemoglobin is feeding, right? Let's look at 2018. As of 2018, there's a rule in the WA that women with what they're calling DSD, difference in sexual development, that would be intersex, that could be trans women, that could be lots of different things that come under that umbrella, but it would not be cis women. Their testosterone levels has to be under 5 nanomoles per liter. Now, what does that mean? That's just a number, right? Let me explain to you what that number is. Cis men's testosterone usually ranks in at about 10 to 35 nanomoles per liter, which really depends on how active they are and lots of different circumstances about where they are in their lives, but 10 to 35 is generally the range. And cis women are generally below 2.4. There is not now, nor has there ever been, a testosterone limit for cis women. In 2022, there's a lot of dust up about the unfairness of trans athletes, and so the recommendation by the medical professionals who were advising the WA at the time was to make that 2.5 limit across the board for all women. So women with DSD, cisgender women, any women who compete need to be under 2.4, 2.5 nanomoles per liter. Seems fair. The WA said, nah, we're just going to do it for women with DSD, and we're going to say you have to be below 2.4. Just a note so that you know, women with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, typically have testosterone in their bodies at a level of about 5 nanomoles per liter. So what does all this mean? Like I said, I get asked a lot that question about how do you feel about trans athletes competing? And I think what people are typically asking is, how do I feel about people competing in the Olympics or in elite competitions as trans athletes? And honestly, what I think is there should be a rule across the board for everybody within a reasonable, medically advised range to test hormones in the bodies and bloods of people who rank as elite athletes. What I do know, both from my work as a therapist and my work as an advocate and my existence as a human and the people I've been around, is that when people begin to question what society has always told them, when people are exposed to new ideas, to new people, to authenticity in conversation, they are often more open to understanding points of view that are not theirs. The issue that I saw, and it was named in the podcast, I want to be really clear about that. They did name this imbalance of asking JVN, a non-binary human, to justify and to stand up for and to educate on behalf of the trans community. Expecting that labor from them is inappropriate. Also, I have stayed away on my channel of making videos like this because I'm not trans and I don't want to speak into the experience of someone who is. But I also recognize that as a mental health professional, as someone who works with trans people and has for many years, I do have experience and knowledge that other people don't. And I do have a place where I can educate people, not from the standpoint of being trans, but the standpoint of the inappropriateness of the arguments that we have, of the laws that are passed, and of the ways that we understand people to be human. Because what's happening right now is dehumanizing. That is all for today. I feel like that's more than enough for today. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that you stuck it out through this whole video. I will see you all again next week. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other.